The galaxy had known many species, many civilizations, but none as feared and powerful as the Deathworlders. They had long been the apex predators of the universe, their warships and armies unmatched in strength. The very mention of their name sent chills down the spines of even the most powerful empires. And yet on this day, a simple human diplomat stood in front of them, nervously awaiting the outcome of his desperate plea. The human's name was Elias Moreau, an ambassador from Earth, sent on a mission that seemed impossible from the very start. Humanity, now a thriving force in the galaxy, had garnered enemies and allies alike, but nothing had prepared them for the day when the Deathworlders turned their eyes on them. They were not just enemies. They were a threat unlike anything Earth had ever faced. Moreau had arrived at the Deathworlders' home planet days before, and during those days, he'd seen their advanced technology, their towering cities, and their vast fleets of warships. Everything about them screamed power. And now, standing before their leader, the one known only as Sherakal, he was trembling, not from fear of death, but from the fear of humanity's extinction. It wasn't just the power of the Deathworlders that terrified him. It was their indifference. The Deathworlders didn't care about diplomacy, peace talks, or anything resembling compassion. Their code was simple. If you were weak, you were expendable. No one had ever beaten them, and no one ever would. They didn't make deals. They didn't compromise. If humanity was to survive, it had to prove it was worth sparing. That was the essence of Moreau's plea. "You don't understand," Moreau had said, his voice shaking slightly, trying to mask his fear with determination. "Humanity has a long history of overcoming impossible odds. We are not weak. We can show you that, but we need your help. We are willing to stand side by side with you. Learn from your ways. Please, we just need time." The leader of the Deathworlders, Sherakal, sat in front of him, silent, a towering figure dressed in ornate armor that seemed to shimmer with dark energy, his cold eyes studying Moreau's every word. Moreau had never felt so small, so insignificant as he did in the presence of this being. Sherakal was not just a leader. He was an ancient force, a predator who had seen countless civilizations rise and fall. And now, humanity's fate rested in his hands. The Deathworlders were known for their ruthlessness, for the destruction they left in their wake. It wasn't just that they had the power to wipe out entire planets. They had done it before. Their warships could reduce cities to dust in mere moments, and they had no hesitation in using them. The idea of appealing to their mercy seemed almost laughable, but Moreau had no choice. Earth was on the brink of war with them. And if they didn't act now, if they didn't convince the Deathworlders that humanity had a future, the planet would be lost forever. He knew his words might fall on deaf ears. He knew that if Sherakal decided humanity was a lost cause, there was nothing he could do to change that. Yet the diplomat clung to a small hope, a small glimmer of belief that maybe, just maybe, the Deathworlders weren't completely indifferent. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, Sherakal spoke, his voice low and filled with the weight of centuries. "You speak of hope, of humanity's strength, but your species has shown nothing but weakness. The universe does not care for your hope. The universe cares for power." Moreau took a deep breath, trying to find his words. "We may not be the most powerful, but we have something more, something you cannot see through mere strength. We have ingenuity, creativity, and a drive to survive. That is what makes us different. That is what will make us strong enough to stand with you, to be a worthy ally. Please, give us a chance." Shirakal's eyes narrowed. "A chance? Your planet was once nothing but a fledgling species. You have grown, yes, but what if I told you that growth means nothing? That in the end, you are still weak." Moreau's heart pounded in his chest, but he knew he couldn't back down now. This was their last chance. He had read the history of the Deathworlders. He knew how they operated. They were not moved by simple words or pleas, but they respected strength. They respected the ability to adapt, to survive against all odds. And that was what he needed to prove. "I'm asking for a chance to show you that we can be strong," Morrow said, his voice growing steadier. "We can prove to you that we are worthy of your respect. Give us this opportunity, and we will fight with everything we have. We may not have your power, but we have something else. We have a future." For a long moment, Sherakal was silent, his gaze piercing through Morrow. It felt as though the weight of 1,000 years of history pressed down on the diplomat, and the room seemed to grow colder, darker. Then, just when Morrow thought the leader would dismiss him, Shirakal's voice broke the silence. "Your species will not survive. But I am intrigued. I will give you this chance, not for your survival, but for your future. You will prove your worth, or you will be erased." Morrow's heart skipped a beat. He had done it. Against all odds, he had convinced the Deathworlder leader to give humanity a chance. But the price was clear. Failure meant extinction. The fate of Earth rested on his shoulders, and on the shoulders of every human who would stand to fight. Sherakal raised his hand, signaling the end of the conversation. "We will send our warships to monitor your progress. If you fail, we will act. But be warned, human, if you are weak, we will not hesitate to destroy you." The diplomat stood in stunned silence as Sherakal turned away, signaling the end of the meeting. The coldness in the air was suffocating, and Morrow could feel the weight of the entire galaxy pressing on him. Humanity had been given a chance, but it was a chance that came with deadly consequences. As Morrow exited the room, he tried to steady his breath, but the reality of what had just transpired hit him like a freight train. The Deathworlders were not just offering humanity a chance. They were setting a test to prove that humans had the strength to survive, to adapt, and to become something more than the weak species they had once been. And if they failed, the warships would destroy them without hesitation. Morrow glanced up at the massive sky above the Deathworlder planet, where fleets of ships began to move into position, ready to watch, ready to judge. This was no longer just a diplomatic mission. It was a fight for survival, a test of everything humanity had fought for. As he boarded the shuttle to return to Earth, Morrow couldn't help but wonder if humanity was truly ready for the challenge ahead. The Deathworlders had been watching, waiting for a sign of strength, and they were about to get one. Whether humanity could rise to the occasion, or fall to the mighty power of the Deathworlders, would be determined in the days to come. But one thing was certain: the galaxy would never forget the Plea that had shaken it to its very core. The human fleet had been preparing for what felt like an eternity. Tensions had been building ever since the plea to the Deathworlders had been made. Elias Morrow's desperate words had opened a door, but it was a door into an unknown future. A future where humanity's very survival was in the hands of beings who viewed them as little more than insects, creatures beneath notice until they proved otherwise. The Deathworlders had made it clear. Humanity had to show its worth, or face annihilation. There was no middle ground, and as Earth's leaders gathered, they knew the stakes were higher than ever. The fate of the entire species rested on the next steps. Every move had to be calculated with precision. Every decision weighed against the possibility of extinction. The massive warships that filled the skies above Earth were a testament to humanity's defiance. Although the Deathworlders' ships hovered in the atmosphere, not a single shot had been fired. Yet that moment of silence only amplified the tension. Humanity had been given the barest of chances, barely a sliver of hope. If they failed to live up to the expectations set before them, that sliver would be snuffed out, and Earth would be no more. Morrow stood in the command center, watching as the Earth fleet powered up its engines. His mind was still racing from the conversation with Sherakal. The Deathworlder leader had been clear: prove your strength or be erased. But what did it mean to prove strength to a species so far beyond human comprehension? How could they possibly show that humanity was worthy of survival? "We can't just win this with weapons," Morrow muttered to himself, his fingers tapping on the table. He wasn't thinking about firepower. He wasn't thinking about the fleet or their advanced technology. It wasn't enough to beat the Deathworlders in combat. It was about showing them something far more elusive. It was about showing resilience, creativity, and the ability to adapt. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Sir, the Deathworlder fleet is moving. They're deploying ships in formation, all aimed directly at Earth." The cold chill in Moreau's veins returned. His heart raced as he stared at the holoscreen in front of him. The dark ships of the Deathworlders loomed large, their advanced designs a horrifying reminder of how outmatched humanity truly was. The ships were intimidating, but it wasn't their firepower that frightened him. It was the unknown. What would the Deathworlders do? Would they obliterate Earth in an instant, or would they give humanity time to prove itself? Moreau turned to the room full of commanders, his mind racing. We need to send a message, not just a military message. We need to show the Deathworlders that we are more than capable of standing alongside them. We need to demonstrate our ability to adapt. But sir, we don't have the power to go toe-to-toe with them. Our ships, a commander began, but Moreau cut him off. I know that, he replied. But we have something they don't. We have the will to survive. We can outthink them. We can outlast them. The Deathworlders want to see if humanity is worthy of survival. So let's show them. It wasn't an easy decision to make, but it was their only choice. The fleet commander nodded, understanding that every move they made now could either strengthen their position or seal their fate. There was no room for error. Hours later, the first human ship moved into position, the crew preparing to execute a dangerous maneuver. It wasn't about showing brute strength. It wasn't about trying to outgun the Deathworlders. No, it was about showing that humanity could think, that it could innovate, that it could rise to the occasion when faced with the impossible. As the fleet moved, the vast Deathworlder ships followed in formation, watching carefully. The human ships weren't trying to engage. They weren't even armed for battle. They were conducting a daring strategy, something designed to display humanity's unique ability to think outside the box. It was a gamble. If it worked, they would send a clear signal that humanity was worth their time. If it failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. Moreau stood in the observation room, his eyes glued to the large screen in front of him. The human ships made their move, performing complex, seemingly erratic maneuvers designed to demonstrate their flexibility and tactical prowess. They shifted quickly through space, weaving between asteroids and stars, dodging unseen obstacles in a display of agility that only a species as young and desperate as humanity could dream of. The Deathworlder ships observed from a distance. Their sensors flared as they tracked the movements. Moreau couldn't help but feel a pang of hope. The Deathworlders were watching closely, studying every move. There was a chance, a small one, that this would be enough. Seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. Would the Deathworlders dismiss humanity's efforts as childish? Or would they see what Moreau was trying to show them? That humanity wasn't just a species of survival. They were a species capable of brilliance when the stakes were at their highest. Then, the unexpected happened. The lead Deathworlder ship moved forward, its massive frame cutting through space with a grace that defied its size. The human fleet hesitated for a split second. Was this it? Was this the moment that they would all be destroyed? A signal came through, direct from the Deathworlder flagship. Moreau's heart pounded as the screen flickered, and a figure appeared. It was Shirakel, the Deathworlder leader, his stern expression unchanging. But this time, there was something different in his eyes, something unreadable. You have shown something, human. Shirakel's voice rumbled. Something I did not expect. This maneuver, this display of agility and adaptability, it is surprising. Moreau couldn't hide the relief in his voice. You saw it. We're more than just a species with weapons. We're thinkers. We adapt. We fight not with sheer strength, but with our minds. Shirakel's expression remained unmoved, but there was a flicker of something. Perhaps respect, perhaps amusement, but there was something there. The leader's cold gaze finally softened just a little. You have passed the first test, human, but this is only the beginning. The Deathworlders do not take kindly to those who fail. Remember that. Morrow's breath caught in his chest, the tension in the air so thick he could almost taste it. The Deathworlders hadn't dismissed them. In fact, they had taken notice. But that was just the first test. There were more to come. And the stakes were higher than ever before. As Sherakel's image faded from the screen, the room fell silent. The human fleet commanders exchanged glances. It wasn't over yet. Humanity had taken its first step, but the real battle had just begun. And as Morrow stood in the quiet room, staring out at the fleet of ships on the horizon, he couldn't help but wonder what the Deathworlders would demand next. Would humanity be able to prove itself worthy once again? Or would this small, fragile hope come crashing down under the weight of the galaxy's might? Only time would tell. The tension in the command room was palpable. As the Deathworlder fleet loomed overhead, their ships blocking out the stars, Elias Morrow stood still, staring at the massive holographic projection in front of him. His mind raced, replaying the conversation with Sherakel, the Deathworlder leader. The first test had been passed, but Morrow knew better than anyone that this was far from over. It was just the beginning, and he had no illusion about what would happen if humanity failed. Sherakel had been clear. Humanity had shown potential with their display of agility, their ability to adapt. But that was only one small part of what the Deathworlders wanted to see. What the universe's most powerful predators wanted was proof of strength, something that couldn't be faked. And now, humanity had to demonstrate something far more challenging. They had to show that they could endure in the face of overwhelming adversity. The clock was ticking. The Deathworlders had set a deadline, a final moment to prove humanity's worth, and that moment was approaching faster than Morrow could ever have imagined. The human fleet was preparing for their next maneuver, one that would take them even closer to the brink of destruction. If they failed, there would be no chance for survival. But if they succeeded, if humanity could rise to the occasion, they might just earn the respect of the Deathworlders. They might prove that they weren't just a fleeting species, something to be wiped out with a single strike. Morrow took a deep breath. He looked around at the faces of the fleet commanders, the men and women who would risk everything for humanity's survival. They were nervous, but their resolve was clear. Each one of them had given their all to this mission, and they knew what was at stake. They had seen the Deathworlder ships above them, felt the fear in their bones, but they weren't backing down. They couldn't. Not now. "We've come this far," Morrow said, his voice steady, despite the chaos brewing inside him. "But this next move is everything. We're not just showing our strength with weapons, we're showing it with our will to survive. If we don't make it through this, humanity's future ends today." A quiet murmur passed through the room. The fleet commanders nodded in agreement. They had been through countless simulations, countless exercises, but this was different. This wasn't just a battle. It was a test of who humanity truly was. The fleet's plan was simple. They would launch an unexpected attack on the Deathworlder forces, not with brute force, but with a strategy designed to showcase humanity's ingenuity and resilience. The Deathworlders had already shown their power, and they had given humanity one chance to prove itself. But Morrow understood one thing above all. This test wasn't just about military strength. It was about showing that humanity could be as fierce as the Deathworlders, but in a different way. The fleet prepared for the operation, moving with precision as the Deathworlder ships remained in formation above them. Their overwhelming size and power had been a constant reminder of how outmatched humanity was, but that didn't matter now. They had no choice but to fight, to show that they had the resilience to endure. Morrow stood by the communications panel, his hands clenched into fists. He couldn't afford to think of what might happen if they failed. Failure meant extinction, and he couldn't let that happen. He had to focus on what was in front of him, the plan, the mission, and the hope that humanity could rise to the challenge. "Sir," one of the commanders called out, snapping Morrow from his thoughts. "The Deathworlder fleet is signaling. They're preparing to engage." Morrow nodded, his jaw tightening. "All right, everyone. You know what we have to do. It's time to show them who we are." The fleet moved swiftly into position, aligning themselves with the calculated precision that had been drilled into them. Morrow watched as their ships began the maneuvers. They were not using weapons to strike, at least not yet. Instead, they were making a direct but unorthodox approach. A rapid, coordinated series of evasive and offensive tactics designed to confuse the Deathworlders, to make them question their assumptions about humanity's abilities. Each move the human fleet made was a gamble. They had no idea how the Deathworlders would react. Would they respect humanity's audacity, or would they dismiss it as a feeble attempt at survival? The ships darted in and out of the formation, moving in ways that no one had anticipated. For a moment, the Deathworlder fleet seemed to falter, the massive ships swerving slightly as they tried to adjust to the unpredictable human maneuvers. Morrow's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the screen, waiting for a response. If this worked, if they could pull this off, they might just have a chance. Then, in the blink of an eye, a wave of light erupted across the battlefield. The Deathworlders had countered the humans' move. The Deathworlder fleet retaliated with full force, unleashing a barrage of energy blasts that shook the human ships. Morrow's stomach lurched as the blasts hit one of the human vessels, sending it spiraling into space. "Hold steady," Morrow called out, trying to keep his voice calm. "Don't panic. We've practiced for this." The human fleet fought back with everything they had. They were outgunned, outmanned, and outmatched, but they fought with a desperate ferocity that only humans could muster. They fought not just for victory, but for survival. As the battle continued, Morrow knew that this wasn't just about the ships or the weapons. It was about something far deeper. It was about humanity's will to survive, no matter the odds. The Deathworlders' energy blasts were unrelenting, but the human fleet continued to maneuver, dodging, weaving, and striking when they could. It wasn't the raw power of the human ships that made a difference, but their ingenuity and perseverance. They adapted quickly, constantly changing their tactics in response to the Deathworlders' overwhelming firepower. Morrow watched as the Deathworlder fleet adjusted their strategy, perhaps impressed by the humans' resilience. For a moment, it seemed like the Deathworlders might actually be uncertain. And that was when it happened. A sudden, sharp pulse of light streaked across the sky. The Deathworlder flagship, a massive ship that had been watching from the rear, suddenly broke formation. It moved in an unexpected direction, heading straight for the heart of the human fleet. Morrow's eyes widened as he realized what this meant. The Deathworlders were not just attacking, they were making a statement. He could feel the weight of it. The Deathworlders had been watching. They had been testing humanity. And now, they had seen enough. The voice of Sherakal filled the comm system, booming in Morrow's ears. "Your species has passed the second test. You have survived. But remember, humans, survival does not guarantee peace. There is still much to prove." Morrow's heart skipped a beat. They had made it through the second test, but the Deathworlders were far from finished. Humanity had proven itself resilient, but survival alone would not be enough. The next test would be even more difficult. Morrow could only hope that they were ready. The battle raged on, but the human fleet had survived the worst. Now it was up to humanity to prove once again that they were worth the Deathworlders' respect. And if they succeeded, if they truly proved their strength, maybe, just maybe, they would earn their place in the galaxy. But only time would tell. The aftermath of the battle left humanity with a strange mixture of triumph and anxiety. The fleet had survived the Deathworlders' brutal counterattack, but only just. The damage to human ships was severe, but they had managed to hold their ground, proving that despite their technological disadvantage, they could endure. Elias Morrow stood in the command center, gazing at the aftermath of the battle. The holographic map of the battlefield flickered, showing the scattered remains of human and Deathworlder ships. Some were drifting helplessly in space, others burned out and lifeless, But humanity's fleet, though battered, was still intact. Morau felt a surge of relief, if only for a moment. The fact that they had survived the Deathworlders' wrath didn't guarantee their future, not by a long shot. "I can't believe we made it through that," one of the fleet commanders muttered, his voice low and exhausted. Morau didn't answer right away. His mind was still reeling from the battle, trying to process everything that had just happened. The Deathworlders hadn't destroyed them outright, and that alone was a small victory. But there was something else. As the battle had unfolded, as the human fleet had danced on the edge of annihilation, the Deathworlders had watched. They had observed, waiting for the humans to show that they could not just survive, but adapt and fight with strategy. And humanity had done it. They had taken the most impossible odds and turned them into a testament of their resilience. But now there was no time for celebration. Morau knew that the Deathworlders would not be content with just one display of strength. The tests weren't over. The leader of the Deathworlders, Shirakel, had already warned them. Survival alone wasn't enough. Humanity had proven they could endure, but that wasn't a guarantee. The Deathworlders had one final test for them. One last challenge to see if humanity was truly worthy of surviving in a universe dominated by such powerful predators. The fleet commanders had already gathered in the briefing room, each one exhausted but determined. Their faces reflected a shared understanding that this next phase of the trial would be even more dangerous than the last. The Deathworlders have shown us they're not satisfied with just watching us survive, Morau said, his voice steady, though the weight of the situation hung heavily in the air. This next test will push us to our limits. If we can't pass it, they'll wipe us out. One of the commanders, an older woman with sharp eyes, looked up at him. "What kind of test are we looking at, sir?" Morau sighed, knowing he didn't have all the answers. "It's hard to say, but we can't afford to take any chances. We've shown them that we can survive a direct assault. Now we need to show them something else, our ability to act in the face of an impossible situation. We need to show them that we can outthink, outmaneuver, and ultimately outlast them." His words were met with a heavy silence. Everyone knew that the Deathworlders weren't just looking for clever tactics or strategy. They wanted to see if humanity could be more than just a survivor species. They wanted to see if humans could prove they belonged in the galaxy, alongside civilizations that had mastered every form of warfare. Suddenly, the communications officer looked up from his console. "Sir, the Deathworlder flagship is broadcasting a new message." Morau's eyes narrowed. He motioned for the officer to put it on the main screen. As the holographic display flared to life, the imposing figure of Shirakel filled the room once again, his voice echoing through the speakers with authority. "You have shown your strength in battle, human, but the final test is upon you. I have placed your fleet in a simulated conflict, one that mirrors a true war scenario. Your objective is not to defeat us. Do not misunderstand me. You cannot. But you must show us that you can think, adapt, and survive without the tools of traditional warfare." The room went silent. Morau felt the blood drain from his face. What did Shirakel mean? A simulated conflict. It sounded almost like a game, a test. But in reality, the stakes were far too high for it to be taken lightly. "Your fleet is surrounded." Shirakel's voice continued, colder than before. "You will face waves of relentless attacks, with no way of winning through strength alone. Your only chance is to use what you have learned from me, to prove that you understand your place in the galaxy." A chill ran down Morau's spine. The Deathworlders were offering them no favors. It wasn't a true battle. It was a test of intellect, of humanity's ability to handle what seemed like an insurmountable challenge. There would be no victories in the traditional sense. The Deathworlders wanted to see if humanity could come up with a solution in the face of overwhelming odds. Shirakel's eyes narrowed as if he could sense Morau's growing anxiety. "I trust you understand the gravity of this test. Do not disappoint us, human. If you fail, the consequences will be irreversible." The transmission cut off, leaving the room in stunned silence. The gravity of the situation settled in like a weight on Moreau's chest. There would be no more battles to fight in the conventional sense. There would be no victory through sheer power. If humanity was going to survive, they would need to think their way through this, to demonstrate that they were more than just a species that fought for its life. They were a species that could adapt, outthink, and survive even the deadliest of challenges. Moreau stood in front of the assembled commanders, his gaze determined. We've got one shot at this. This isn't just about military strength anymore. This is about showing the Deathworlders that humanity can survive without the crutch of brute force. We need to use our minds, our creativity, our adaptability. A voice from the back of the room spoke up, its tone sharp. Are we sure we even have what it takes to succeed in a test like this? The Deathworlders are testing everything we are. If we fail, everything is gone. Moreau nodded, acknowledging the fear in the officer's voice. I know the stakes are higher than ever, but we've shown them we can endure, and we can innovate. This is our moment to prove that we can adapt in ways that even the Deathworlders didn't expect. We have to outthink them. As the fleet commanders prepared for the next stage of the test, the reality of what lay ahead became clear. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the future of humanity in a galaxy where only the strongest and the smartest could thrive. Humanity's fate rested not on the power of its weapons, but on the power of its mind. The Deathworlders were watching, and now humanity had to prove that it was worthy of survival, not by force, but by intellect and adaptability. Time was running out. The human fleet hung suspended in space, the massive silhouettes of Deathworlder ships surrounding them on all sides. The stars, once so distant and calm, now felt closer than ever, pressing down on humanity's fragile existence. Elias Moreau stood at the front of the command center, staring at the digital map on the large screen, which displayed their exact position within the simulated conflict the Deathworlders had set up for them. The message from Shirakel still echoed in Moreau's mind. You cannot win by strength alone. Prove to us that you can adapt, think, and survive. Show us that you belong in the galaxy. It was a challenge that had sent a ripple of anxiety through the human fleet. It was clear that brute force would not work. The Deathworlders, creatures of overwhelming power, had stripped away that option. The humans would be tested on something far more difficult: their ability to think their way out of an impossible situation. Report, Moreau barked, snapping himself out of his reverie. The officers around him were busy, their faces a mix of stress and determination. Sir, the communications officer called out, we've analyzed the Deathworlder fleet's positions. They've surrounded us completely, just like they said they would. We're cut off from all escape routes. Our ships are isolated, and there's no way to break through. Moreau clenched his fists, the weight of the situation heavy on his chest. We're surrounded, but we're not helpless. This isn't about breaking through. We need to find a way to survive. Another officer, Lieutenant Chandler, spoke up. Sir, if we try to make a break for it, we'll be destroyed in minutes. Our best option is to rely on our agility and tactics. The Deathworlders might be stronger, but we know how to outthink them. Moreau nodded. The lieutenant was right. Survival didn't always require brute strength. It was about using what they had, human creativity and adaptability. But Moreau knew that it wouldn't be easy. Every action, every move they made, would have to be executed with perfect precision. Moreau turned back to the holographic map of the surrounding fleet. He could see the Deathworlder ships, their imposing forms casting long shadows on the human fleet. The Deathworlders weren't attacking, not yet, but their presence was a constant, overwhelming pressure. The longer they waited, the closer the humans came to a deadly mistake. We have to give them something unexpected, Moreau said, his mind working through the possibilities. They're expecting us to act like prey, to panic and rush into battle. But that's what they want. We need to turn the tables. Let's make them second-guess us. Let's make them wonder if they've misjudged humanity. How do you propose we do that, sir? Asked Lieutenant Chandler, his voice full of curiosity. Morrow paced in front of the command center's massive screen, his thoughts racing. The Deathworlders had one thing they prized above all: predictability. They were warriors, yes, but they didn't expect humans to fight with cunning or unpredictability. They'd assumed that humanity would break under pressure, just as any lesser species would. But humanity had something else: resourcefulness. The ability to think outside the box, to adapt quickly to new challenges. "We can't beat them in direct combat," Morrow said, looking around at the commanders. "But we can make them doubt their superiority. We'll use their own expectations against them. We'll outsmart them." He took a deep breath and made his decision. "Prepare to execute a counter-strategy, one that mimics a breakdown in our fleet's communication systems. We'll feign a malfunction in our ships, make it look like we're panicking, that we've lost control." The officers exchanged glances, unsure. Morrow could see their hesitation, but he pressed on. "If we make them think we're losing it, they'll lower their guard. The Deathworlders will assume we've given up, and that's when we'll strike. We'll use their overconfidence to our advantage. We'll give them a show of weakness to bait them into making a mistake." The plan wasn't foolproof. In fact, it was risky to the point of insanity. If the Deathworlders saw through it, humanity would be wiped out instantly. But it was their best chance. The alternative was to continue playing into their hands and hope they wouldn't destroy them out of sheer boredom. And that was not an option. Minutes passed, and the fleet began to execute Morrow's plan. Human ships simulated critical communication errors, their systems glitching at just the right moments. They sent false signals of distress, making it seem as though the fleet was losing its coordination. Small, insignificant ships that would have been ignored in battle were now being sent on erratic, almost random paths, as though their pilots were losing control. It was chaos, but controlled chaos, meant to deceive the Deathworlders into thinking humanity was unraveling. At first, the Deathworlders didn't respond. The human fleet had been maneuvering in unpredictable ways before, but this was different. They were disorganized, disarrayed. It was exactly what the Deathworlders would expect from a weaker species facing extinction. It wasn't long before the first Deathworlder ship advanced cautiously, its sensors scanning the human fleet for signs of vulnerability. Another followed, and then another, their massive forms pressing forward in what could only be described as a slow, predatory approach. Morrow stood, his eyes locked on the screen, watching the Deathworlders advance. Every moment felt like an eternity. Were they falling into the trap? Were the Deathworlders buying it? His fingers drummed nervously on the table as the tension mounted. The slightest misstep would spell the end. Then it happened. The first Deathworlder ship moved in closer, its weapons charged, but there was hesitation in its movements. The ship seemed uncertain, waiting for a sign that the humans would respond. The other ships followed suit, waiting for the opening move. They didn't realize it, but they were falling right into the trap. Morrow's voice broke the silence. "Now, execute the counter-strike." The human fleet snapped into action, their ships suddenly shifting from disarray to synchronized chaos. The false communication errors stopped, and the human ships began coordinating their movements once more. The ships that had been moving aimlessly turned sharply, racing toward the Deathworlder fleet. It wasn't an attack, but it was a display of agility, of unpredictability that the Deathworlders hadn't anticipated. It was designed to confuse them, to disorient them into thinking the humans had somehow regained control. The Deathworlders responded too late. Their ships began to react, but the humans had already created enough doubt. The subtle maneuvering, the unexpected coordination, the speed with which the fleet had turned the situation around. It was enough to make the Deathworlders pause, even if only for a moment. Morrow felt the tension in his chest ease slightly as the Deathworlder flagship broke formation, pulling back just a bit. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but the message had been sent. The humans weren't giving up. They weren't going to break under pressure. And most importantly, they had just shown the Deathworlders that they could adapt, outthink, and survive. The silence in the room stretched for a long time before the communications officer spoke again. "Sir, we've received another transmission from the Deathworlders." Morrow didn't need to ask who it was. He knew it was Shirakal. The Deathworlder's voice echoed through the command center, cold and unwavering as always. "You have passed the third test, human. You have shown that you are capable of more than survival. You have shown us that you can outmaneuver even the most powerful forces in the galaxy. Consider this a warning, though. The final test awaits." Morrow exhaled, his heart pounding in his chest. They had passed the third test, but there was no time to rest. The final challenge was still ahead. The silence that followed the transmission from Shirakal was deafening. The humans in the command center had barely dared to breathe as the message replayed in their minds. They had passed the third test, just barely, but it didn't feel like a victory. There was still one final challenge to face. Elias Morrow stood motionless, staring at the glowing holographic map in front of him. The Deathworlders had warned them that the final test would be the ultimate one that would push them beyond anything they had faced before. The fleet commanders around him were exhausted, but there was no time to rest. No time to celebrate their small triumph. The Deathworlders didn't care about small victories. They were only interested in one thing: whether humanity had the resilience, the intelligence, and the strength to survive in the long term. And that strength wasn't just physical. It was mental, tactical, and moral. "We've made it this far," Morrow said, his voice steady but tired. "But we're not done yet. We still have one final test to face, and we don't know what it's going to be. We need to be ready for anything." A young officer from the intelligence team spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. "Sir, we've gone through every possible scenario in our simulations. The Deathworlders aren't going to give us a traditional battle. We'll have to fight them on their terms. Whatever that means, we have to expect the unexpected." Morrow nodded. "Exactly. And I know that after everything we've been through, it's easy to think that we're prepared for anything, but we have to be honest with ourselves. We don't know what they have planned. The Deathworlders are playing a game we can't fully understand, but we can't afford to be outsmarted now. Not when we've come this far." The room fell into quiet contemplation. Every person in that room understood the stakes. The galaxy, in all its vastness and danger, had never been more real than it was now. The Deathworlders were testing humanity, yes, but the real question was whether humanity had what it took to earn its place among the stars. Morrow's eyes locked on the map once again. Despite their tactical victory moments earlier, there was still the looming presence of the Deathworlder fleet, encircling them, waiting. They had already shown they were capable of combat. Now, they had to prove they could make the next leap. The final test would require humanity to dig deep into what made them truly unique. It would be a test of creativity, morality, and sacrifice. "Whatever happens, we have to stick together," Morrow continued. "The Deathworlders want us to break. They want us to second-guess our every move, but we can't. Not now. We've already shown them that we can survive and adapt. The next step is to show them that we can think beyond what's expected of us. We're not just survivors. We are builders, innovators, and thinkers. That's the edge we have. Let's use it." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement, the weariness still present, but with renewed determination. There was no more fear in their eyes, just the fierce spark of resolve. If the Deathworlders wanted humanity to prove its worth, this was their chance. Hours later, the fleet was once again ready. The next transmission from the Deathworlders came through, and the bridge officers gathered in tense silence. The screen flickered, and once again, Shirakal's imposing form filled the room. "You have done well, humans. Your resilience has been noted." Shirakal's voice boomed, carrying a chilling calmness. "But this next test will prove whether you truly deserve to continue your existence. This is not a battle of strength or intellect. It is a test of sacrifice." Morrow's heart sank. Sacrifice. The word alone sent a ripple of unease through the fleet. Humanity had already shown its adaptability, its resilience, and its ingenuity. But sacrifice was a different thing entirely. What did the Deathworlders mean by that? The screen flashed, showing a new set of coordinates. The Deathworlder fleet's ships had been rearranged, and Moreau immediately recognized the pattern. They were forming a blockade around a massive, uninhabited planet on the outer rim of the galaxy, a desolate, barren world. Its surface was pocked with craters and scars, a place where life couldn't survive. "What's the catch?" Lieutenant Chandler muttered under his breath, but Moreau could already see the implications. "The Deathworlders are telling us that we must make a choice," Moreau said, his voice strained. "We either break through their blockade and face certain annihilation, or we give up everything. The planet they've marked for us, it's a trap. They want us to make the hard choice. We can sacrifice our fleet, our people, or we can give up everything we'd fought for." The implications were clear. The Deathworlders weren't offering a direct confrontation this time. They were challenging humanity with a moral decision. Would humanity make the hard choice to sacrifice something for the greater good? To sacrifice their lives, or perhaps even the future of the human race, for survival? A collective silence filled the room. It was the hardest decision humanity had ever faced. In battle, they had fought fiercely, but this was different. This was a test of humanity's heart. The fleet could not outrun their enemies forever. This might be the moment where they had to give everything up, be it their lives, or the very essence of who they were as a species. Moreau's mind raced. He thought of all the men and women who had fought beside him, of all the humans who had sacrificed so much just to get to this point. He thought of the legacy of humanity, their struggle, their passion, their drive. He thought of the future they had yet to create, and the lives they had yet to touch. The Deathworlders were pushing them to the edge, making them choose between survival and sacrifice. Moreau knew the question now wasn't just about intelligence or strength. It was about what kind of species humanity was, what they stood for. He clenched his fists. "Prepare the fleet. We will not back down. But we will show the Deathworlders what humanity is capable of. We will make our stand, together." He didn't know what the future held, but he knew this. If humanity was to earn its place in the galaxy, it would have to prove that it was more than just a survivor. It would have to prove that, no matter the cost, it would never lose its humanity. The fleet moved into position, the silence of space pressing down on them. The next test was about to begin, and Moreau could only hope that when the time came, they would make the right choice. And when that moment came, humanity would show the Deathworlders and the universe what they were truly capable of. The human fleet, a fragile band of ships, floated like ants in the face of an overwhelming cosmic storm. Ahead, the Deathworlder blockade loomed, a dark, imposing line of ships that filled the stars. The stark contrast between their massive ships and humanity's fleet made the situation feel even more dire. The silence in the command center was suffocating. Everyone knew the stakes. The fleet had passed the previous tests, but this last one felt different. Sacrifice. It wasn't a question of strength or intelligence this time. It was a question of the heart. Moreau understood that the Deathworlders weren't just testing humanity's ability to survive. They were testing humanity's spirit, their morality. The kind of species they were, and Moreau couldn't help but wonder, what would they choose? Moreau stood at the center of the bridge, watching the empty space in front of him. The mission ahead was clear, but the decision weighed heavily on his shoulders. The coordinates on the screen highlighted the barren planet within the blockade. It was a planet devoid of life, not even a trace of atmosphere to speak of. The Deathworlders had given them two choices. Either they fight their way through the blockade, knowing that to do so would likely mean the end of their fleet, or they turn away from the challenge entirely and accept whatever fate awaited them. They had to sacrifice something to pass this test, but what would it be? "We're ready, sir." Chandler's voice broke through the tension, his eyes locked on the map of the blockade. "But you have to make the call." What are we doing? The question echoed in the stillness of the command center. Moreau turned to face the gathered officers. Every face held the same mixture of fear, confusion, and determination. None of them knew what the Deathworlders truly wanted from them, but they all understood one thing. Whatever they did next would define humanity's place in the universe. Moreau's mind raced. His thoughts flickered between possibilities, racing through the data, trying to find an out. But there were no easy answers. Not this time. They had already fought so hard for their survival. But what did that mean if humanity couldn't learn to make sacrifices? "We fight," Moreau said, his voice calm but filled with the weight of the decision. "We break through the blockade." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, settling over the room. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, but none of them argued. This was the choice Moreau had made. There was no going back now. The human fleet would make its stand, not just for survival, but for everything they stood for. "We'll push through," Moreau repeated. "We will not give in to fear. We'll make it through together." The officers began to move with purpose, preparing the fleet for the impending assault. The ships began to position themselves, lining up for the final push. Moreau felt a sense of unity rise in him, an unspoken understanding that this wasn't just about the military or tactics. This was about humanity's future, about proving they had something worth fighting for. They had something no other species had: their humanity. The fleet moved into position, the stars outside the windows looking more like a cruel reminder of their insignificance than ever before. The Deathworlder ships glinted ominously, their weapons primed. It wasn't just a test of survival anymore. The real test was whether humanity could hold on to what made them human when faced with impossible odds. "Firing up engines," the chief engineer called out. The hum of the engines filled the room, the ship vibrating slightly beneath their feet as the fleet began its final move. "Lock on to the first Deathworlder ship," Moreau ordered, his voice steady. "We won't give them the satisfaction of seeing us break. We make our move now." The officers didn't hesitate. They knew what was at stake. Weapons systems came online, the ships locking onto their targets. The sound of the ships charging their weapons was a cold reminder of the brutal reality they were about to face. The fleet was about to clash with a power far greater than anything humanity had ever seen. But they had no other choice. It was now or never. The first wave of Deathworlder ships moved forward, their sheer size dwarfing the human vessels. The massive warships fired, beams of pure energy slicing through the darkness of space, cutting across the human fleet's path. It was a moment of pure chaos, ships darting through space, dodging incoming fire, returning fire as they moved. It was the stuff of nightmares, yet humanity fought with a desperate resolve. Moreau gritted his teeth as the ship rattled under the incoming fire. He watched the map on the screen, calculating their movements, watching for any weaknesses in the Deathworlder blockade. "Engage evasive maneuvers," Moreau shouted, watching as a barrage of enemy fire lanced towards the ship. The crew scrambled to respond, the ship twisting and turning as they avoided the worst of it. But it wasn't enough. A hit shook the vessel, sending shockwaves through the command center. "Shields are down to 30%. A crew member shouted. "We can't take much more of this. Keep pushing forward," Moreau ordered, his jaw clenched. The blockade was too strong, but they couldn't afford to stop. They had to fight through. The fleet pressed on, even as their ships were slowly picked apart. It felt like they were fighting a losing battle, yet humanity's determination never wavered. Moreau saw it in every officer's face, every crew member's hands steady on their consoles. The humans were fighting not just for survival, but for their place in the stars. They wouldn't let the Deathworlders decide their fate. Then, just as things seemed darkest, a surprising shift occurred. One of the Deathworlder ships began to fall back, retreating from the humans. Another followed. Soon, more of the ships were pulling away, opening up a gap in the blockade. The remaining ships didn't seem to expect this sudden change. It was confusion, pure and simple. The Deathworlders didn't understand why the humans were pushing forward so fiercely, why they hadn't given up when all seemed lost. Morrow took advantage of the opening. Move in. Now, we break through the gap. The fleet surged forward, utilizing every ounce of speed, pushing their ships through the now cracking blockade. There was no room for hesitation, no time for fear. They were halfway through when the next wave of Deathworlders began firing once again. But it was too late. The humans had already breached the core of the blockade. We did it. Chandler breathed, looking at the screens in disbelief. We broke through, Morrow muttered, his voice barely audible. His eyes locked onto the retreating Deathworlder fleet, wondering if this was the moment when the Deathworlders realized what they had underestimated. Then, the message came again. The image of Shirakaal appeared on the screen once more. This time, his expression was unreadable, his posture stiff with unspoken rage. "You have passed the final test," Shirakaal said coldly. "Your species has shown us more than we could have imagined. You have proven your strength, your intellect, and your unyielding will to survive. But remember, human, there are consequences to every choice." Morrow looked to the stars ahead. The battle was over for now. But the test had been passed. They had won. Humanity had earned their place in the galaxy. And whatever consequences came next, they would face them together. They had proven one thing beyond all else. Humanity would never give up, no matter the cost.